Welcome to today's tutorial, the SEO Promise Pyramid. And today I'm going to talk to you about something that I recently discovered for myself that has been extremely helpful as I've done SEO. And it's something that I feel as you apply it to your own SEO will really help you do not just SEO, but content marketing. So it all begins with search intent, which discussed in a previous tutorial is really just the question that Google is trying to answer when you do a search query. So in that tutorial that we did on search intent, we talked about several search queries, one of them being best photographers in Hawaii. Google's trying to figure out what question are you asking really. And one thing that we saw when we were looking at this keyword was that wedding was all over the search results. We see wedding in all three local results, and then we see wedding all over the third result and in the questions. But interesting enough, we also see the lack of wedding in result 1 and result 2. And so one thing that we deduced when looking at this keyword was that Google wasn't entirely sure. Google doesn't know if you're looking for a wedding photographer or if you are just needing a photographer for portraits or anything else. So that was something that we put in our keyword research. Search intent was that, hey, there's definitely a lot of wedding on this search intent, but there's other results as well that are number 1. And in that tutorial, it was number 3. And in this tutorial, we can see that it's moved up as Google is testing it. So search intent really is trying to answer the user's question. Now, when you understand that, you really want to look at how does that apply across the board with my SEO. Something that helped me answer that question came from an article from Matthew Woodward called How to Increase Blog Traffic with My Simple Step-by-Step Strategy. And I was reading through this blog post and I noticed something that I had never really thought about. So in this step 1 of this blog post, Matthew discusses something that I feel a lot of bloggers are, and myself included, don't really hone in on, and that is providing a promise to the reader in the title. So what Matthew says here, something the reader can benefit from for visiting the blogs that are featured on the list, and he's talking about a list post, particularly an ego post. And this really stood out to me in the fact that what he was talking about was not just saying, hey, top 10 photographers in Hawaii, but rather top 10 photographers in Hawaii that can really make you look your best. He talked about making a promise very explicit to the user in the title. And this really got me thinking about how really everything we do in SEO and particularly in content marketing is trying to satisfy the user's search intent, trying to give them exactly what they're looking for. And so this is where the SEO Promise Pyramid comes in. Because as I was considering just this promise that Matthew Woodward was talking about, I went to his homepage, and on his homepage, I saw these 3 columns, and he puts it in first person. This is for the user, and the user says, I want to increase my search traffic. I want to start a blog that matters, and I want to start working online. And we can see here that Matthew Woodward is basically just offering promises to the users. When they come here, they know very clearly that he is going to help increase their search traffic. He's going to help them build a blog that can make a difference and that people can start making money online. And when I saw this, a light bulb came on and I realized what Matthew Woodward was doing. He was tying the user to the promises of his website. And I saw it in another spot as well from a website called Confessions of a Homeschooler. And this is on her homepage. And she does it a little bit different from Matthew, where she puts it in second person. If you look at the very first column, new to homeschooling, interested in homeschooling but don't know how to get started, Don't worry, I'll walk you through everything you need to know here. So again, these are promises that she is saying that she's going to teach people that come to her website. Now, when I was sharing this with the class, one of the students gave her window cleaning website as an example. She has on her site also these same columns that we've seen on the other two, and she also has promises. And we see attention to detail, always prepared, expert service, and professionally clean. And she asked, did I do this right? And I realized later, after the class, that these are two different promises, and this is why I wanted to show this. The first two, Matthew Woodward's and the homeschooling example, are promises to content, what you are saying you're going to fulfill. And this third example here is tied to services and could be tied to products, which is much more on the sales side of things and not on the SEO side. Now, she could change what she has here to tie it closer to SEO. And if she did, I would say you really need to tie it to the content of what you're going to have on your website instead of versus the products or services. And frankly, I think she's fine because she's trying to attempt something different. She's trying to make promises to the user on what sort of services they're going to give him or her. So this is the foundation of the pyramid, is what are the promises that you are making just with your website. And as I've looked around, I feel that if you do really more than 3 or 4 promises, it's going to be somewhat confusing. And so I encourage you to, as you're deciding what your promises are, to whittle them down and really focus them. Going higher up in the pyramid, we're now looking at pillar content. This is primary content that you've created that really shows your depth of understanding for the topic and ties back to your site promises. And in the keyword research document that you've done, this goes to the topic clusters. This is the topic that you were using. Now, in the next phase of SEO, topics are being turned into content, and particularly at the main level of a topic, into pillar content. So here's an example of pillar content from a photography website. And I want to point out what they did really well here with the promise. Here where it says the ultimate guide to improve your photography, 77 tips and tricks to help you take perfect photos. So what they're doing here is tying the user into their content. They could have easily said, the ultimate guide to creating great photography. And that really is an implied promise. But here it makes it very clear to the user and to the search engines exactly what promise you're fulfilling with the user. Next, we go to the support promises. And going back to the keyword research document, you had the topic clusters. You had the main topic, and then you had the subtopics underneath. That's what is the support content. And here's another good photography example, and I link it back to the other one even though it comes from a different site, but it's a step-by-step guide to kickstart your journey in photography. So we can again see how it is bringing in the user, showing them exactly what your content is going to help them with. And on this same site, I saw on their related posts, they had quite a few of these articles that really tied the user back in. So hopefully you're starting to understand what this SEO promise is. The SEO promise really is about the user. How are you tying the user into your content, and not just creating content for the sake of creating content, but really tying in your site and your titles, both in your pillar content and your support content, on how to fulfill the user's search intent. So let's go the next step up And here, this is the Subheads promise. And I really believe on the internet, this is so poorly done. Subheads are referring to the headlines that are found throughout the article. They're called by many names: subtitles, subheadlines, subheads. And I took this screenshot here from Smart Blogger because I feel John Morrow, who is the founder of Smart Blogger, does really well at bringing in the promises to the subheads. So here I just screenshot, he had links to his subheads. So he has an article, How to Become a Freelance Writer Starting from Scratch. Okay, again, this is an implied promise. The title is fine. It doesn't always have to have first or second person in the title, but it does help. But if you look at his subhead, so down there, we see as number 1, develop your content creation skills. Number 2, up your SEO game. Number 3, build a portfolio of writing samples. Number 4, get your first paying client. And number 5, scale until you no longer want to. See how John has really tied the reader into his subheadlines. Again, this is no different than the other ones, but just taking it down step by step until you hit the content promise. And the content promise really is delivering on all the other promises that you've made up to this point. And when I was thinking of a blogger who really did this well, I thought of Neil Patel. And I just typed in best article by Neil Patel, and this was the number 1 result. Why SEO is actually all about content marketing. And that's what I really feel is going on here. We're really taking all these keywords that we have been creating and tying a promise to those keywords of saying, this is how I'm going to fulfill your question. And I'm going to bring you into that question. I'm going to show how this applies to you. And I'm going to create amazing content that does that. And the final example, and I feel it's really fitting to end with this example, is Matthew Woodward himself. And I did the same query that I did with Neil Patel, and this was exactly what pulled up. And it really shows how SEO is content marketing. And so as you're filling out your content map, these really are the promises that you are looking to fulfill. What are your site promises? What are your pillar promises? What are your support promises? What are your subhead promises? And what are your content promises? And how do all these promises tie to the user's search intent? And as you focus on this particularly, I promise you that you're going to see an impact not just in your rankings, but also in your conversions and whatever your conversions may be, whatever you're trying to get the user to do. If you're fulfilling their questions with these promises, you are on the right track. So that's it. That's what the SEO promise pyramid is. As you're doing your content mapping, keep that in mind. All right, good luck, and I will see you in the next tutorial.